Hello everybody, this is Soviet Russian Bear, and today I have a returning guest on my channel. It's been a long time since we did last interview, so welcome Joaquin. You are always a welcome guest on my channel.
Oh, thank you for
So
having me.
yeah, so the subject of today's video is Serbia, Vucic, Donald Trump, Kosovo, and President Vucic visit to Washington D.C., where he was sitting in front of Donald Trump, and Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova even made some not really appropriate tweet about the way how the Vucic was sitting. She compared it to the Base Instinct movie with Sharon Stone. Oh, but yeah,
You
nevertheless,
talking about Basic Instinct or what was it called? What was the movie?
Basic
Sharon
Instinct.
Basic Instinct. Wow,
Yeah,
it's an old movie. Wow,
yeah,
what a
yeah,
reference. Okay, cool.
yeah, yeah. So, but nonetheless, many people on the Russian patriotic side of the internet or Russian patriotic websites, YouTube channels say that basically Vucic is trying to drift away from Russia towards the United States, towards the EU. Maybe they say it's the first step of Serbia recognizing Kosovo and normalizing with a Kosovo separatist government. So I would like to ask you for a more like in-depth perspective as you as a person who lives in Serbia and you basically my only Balkan expert. So please, what's your take?
Well, so you were saying
Yeah,
off camera that in the Russian patriotic sort of networks and people that
yeah,
you talked to, that this was like people were really worried about this and were
yeah.
like, yeah, yeah. And what were the things they were saying, like more specifically?
Well, more specifically is that Vucic is sort of doing like Lukashenko style multi-vector policies, try to sit on two chairs to appease like both sides, and that this and basically this they say that this will not play out well for him because this is going to be like a color revolution attempt because like what Lukashenko did to appease the West, he let the NGOs like Soros NGOs, sort of NGOs like NED and all other like Radio Free Europe and all the pro-democracy NGOs, he let them in, and that resulted in a color revolution attempt to overthrow him.
Right. Yes. Well, so, you know, the world is a really complicated place, and ideology doesn't really serve us so well in understanding things. There is something that I will call Vucic derangement syndrome. It's sort of like Trump
Trump
derangement syndrome,
derangement.
but it's
Yeah.
Vucic derangement syndrome. So it's like everything people see through a lens, and patriots are intelligent people. They have also big hearts, and they are led by good instincts. So they should continue to be outraged by anything Vucic does. I think, but the reasons that I think that that is good might surprise you.
So, why do you think it's good? I mean, we see what happened to Ukraine. We see what is happening right now in Belarus. Only the difference between Belarus and Ukraine is that Ukraine was never such affiliated with Russia in such a strong in this, as strongly as Belarus because we have a union state treaty with Belarus. Belarus is a part of the CSTO, basically the Russian version of NATO, and Belarus is a part of a customs union and free trade zone. Basically, Belarusian citizens can cross Russia's border with zero problems. They have basically many the same rights in Russia as they say in Belarus, such as right for medical treatment and so should we but Serbia doesn't have all that, and Serbia is we don't share a common border with Serbia. So many of my Russian competitors expect there's going to be like sort of like Ukrainian scenario, with the exception that it's not going to be led by nationalists, because Serbian nationalists are mainly pro-Russia.
Right, and therein lies the rub. So Belarus nationalism
Is
is
anti-Russian.
heavily infected by like uh, different types of Eurocentric ideology.
Yeah.
Some of it is like pro-Nazi. It's not pro-Russian.
Absolutely not.
Serbian nationalism is pro-Russian, so it's really hard to operationalize Serbian nationalists to break Serbia out of its fraternal relationships with Russia. That's not in the cards. It's a completely different story. So Belarus and Ukraine are more similar in that the right-wing nationalists are really have a demented view of history. What could have been if we had stood with Hitler better? Or what if Hitler had won, then we would be free? So,
Ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And you can look at the flags that they're using in
Yeah.
Belarus. It's like the flags of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Belarus,
Yeah.
which is a strong dog whistle to, 1930s, 1940s politics as well, where there was a revival of this under neo-Nazism.
Yeah.
But today it's like the Disregard Group or the concept of Middle Europa. There's a project, geopolitical project.
Oh,
called
Intermarium.
Intumarium, that's right. And the two C's, Intumarium, is the
Yeah.
Baltic, the Black Sea, right? So
Yeah.
this is not at all related to the Serbian
Yeah.
story. Serbia is like closer geographically to Italy and Greece. So this is like, you mentioned it's not contiguous, doesn't share a border with Russia. Nevertheless, remember that there's been a project for some time for Serbia to join the Belarus-Russia Union State. And this has been proposed even from Milosevic time.
Yeah, Milosevic.
And it's come up a few times afterwards. It's pretty popular. And also Serbia is an observer member of CSTO. So, and they do the Brotherhood, Slavic Brotherhood exercises every year. The military of Serbia trains with the Russian military, and we have a Russian military base that's called an emergency center in Niš, which is going to figure into what we talk about with Kosovo.
Yeah, and and I heard that the Slavic Brotherhood 2020 and the Serbia is not going to participate because, as I heard, because of unprecedented pressure from the EU. Is it true or not?
Look, the EU is so. There was a story going on from like 2014, 2015. But remember, that's when Atlanticism was in its big final push. I believe that NATO as a force in Central and Eastern Europe and the Balkans was destroyed on the battlefields of Donbass. And it was proven what military experts, advisors, and top generals from NATO and Russia both had been saying, both agreed for a long time that any military conflict with Europe, that Russia would be able to secure all the European capitals within a month. So this is a non-issue. The Russian military versus NATO is a non-issue. All of the war games and test runs, the European armies only played this like defensive buffer zone of trying to stall and create time for United States Army to cross the Atlantic Ocean, and not a winnable scenario. In a land war in Eurasia, United States does not have capacity in a land war in Eurasia, period. So now the reason I think that it's really good that Serbian nationalists and Russian patriots, nationalists, whatever you want to call, although those are different, of course, but that whole milieu is good that they oppose this agreement that Vucic made with the United States. It's good because it makes it look like Vucic is being compliant with the United States. That's actually good for a lot of reasons. I know this is strange, but you know the old trick of the sleeping bear. So it is sometimes beyond people's imagination or comprehension to like actually understand how international relations works. It's constantly a state of war, and every agreement between countries is something more like a ceasefire. So ceasefire agreements, you know, are made based upon some appraisal of the balance of forces that are happening. And we just have to realize that when, for example, with Belarus, when Lukashenko says these things like anti-Russian things and Belarus is independent, this serves like a purpose of creating a media holograph, a media simulacrum. Everyone knows that Belarus is controlled by Russia, but we must create this illusion that it's not. This is how the Minsk agreement was able to come into play. Of course, it's not being respected, but nobody thought that it would be. But it established Minsk as this neutral sort of Switzerland-like country within the CSTO. So this is very, very important. Now, that's why nationalist patriots should oppose what Vucic is doing, because then it makes him look much more moderate. It makes him look like he is balancing, okay? But in truth, when you really look at the agreement, the details of it, I think will surprise people. So, for example, it puts a ban on this G is actually come to a stop now as a consequence of this agreement, which is huge for people who are concerned about health and relationship to what's going on with microwave radiation and health. Well, are going to be pleased with this. You know, then there's really nothing contained in the agreement that is different or worse from the Brussels Agreement or the Berlin Agreement. The difference is that what the United States is doing, it is deconstructing NATO and is removing the EU and removing NATO from the equation of U.S.-Serbia bilateral relations. Did you know that actually this Kosovo-Serbia agreement is not an agreement between Serbia and Kosovo?
Well, I guess so, because Kosovo is not a real. It's a puppet. If you want to talk about Kosovo, you better talk with the puppet master, not the puppet itself.
Right. But it's also important that people who are saying that this is equal to recognizing Kosovo is really like, I want to be respectful to people, and I'm encouraging those people to continue their hype for the reasons I said. It's very important. You see, it's statistically inevitable that they will do this, and it is part of the plan that they will do this. You see, the plan doesn't work unless the patriots and nationalists are outraged about it. They have to be crying about it for it to look like a concession. But when you deconstruct it, it is not. And I think therein lies the rub. That's really the big surprise here. I mean, I think people following the G story will know that that's a big thing right there. Okay, that's huge, because that hasn't been tested for safety. And we already know that regular cellular phones, you know, have some problems, right, with cancer and tumors, right, brain cancer, brain tumors. So that's pretty good. Now, what will happen with that? I don't know. It also, the agreement puts a freeze for a year on Kosovo seeking recognition in international bodies. Kosovo is not recognized. They're not recognized by the UN. And just in the last year and a half now, a few more countries came over and unrecognized Kosovo at the level of the General Assembly at the UN. So they don't even have a majority of member states that recognize Kosovo anymore. So the Kosovo is losing this. Albanian Kosovo is losing this story. They're losing this story. They're not winning this story. So now people tend to think in terms of nations, nation states, and national boundaries instead of thinking about civilizational spheres and how trade works. So now what this agreement does is it establishes a mini Schengen for several Balkan states, Macedonia, Albania. Kosovo is not a state, but it's part of this, and Serbia. This agreement that Vucic signed is with the United States, and then there's a parallel agreement that the Albanian entity in Kosovo also signed with the United States. But this is not anything that Serbia signed with Kosovo. Serbia does not sign agreements with Kosovo because Serbia does not recognize Kosovo. The Serbian constitution has not been changed. Kosovo was always an autonomous part.
Region.
Yes, it was always an autonomous region of Serbia, and for all intents and purposes, except for the fact that you have Camp Bondsteel, which is a NATO base at KFOR, without that, it continues to operate as an autonomous region by Serbian law. The only real definitive difference, if we expand our thinking, is that the tax revenues generated from the tax base in Kosovo don't have anything that goes into Serbia, to Belgrade. But when you look at how Yugoslavia was arranged, or when you look at how Serbia, Montenegro existed before the secession of Kosovo, which Serbia does not recognize, but if we rewind a little bit, Serbia was subsidizing Kosovo. So this legal fine print about Serbia is not collecting the base taxes from Kosovo is nonsense. It's actually Kosovo that has been cut off from Serbian investment, has been cut off from Serbian subsidies. It was always that way in the past. Kosovo is not a wealthy region. It doesn't produce, it has several 100,000 people. Serbia has 8 million people. So we just have to think broadly, Yuri. It's like, imagine if China has a free trade agreement, by the way. So this establishes a free trade zone with Serbia and Kosovo, not agreed with each other, but mitigated rather through the lens of the United States. Okay, now this is going to allow people following the story closely know that Serbian products were being hindered from being sold in Kosovo by the Albanian entity and from occupying Pristina, backed by NATO. But the United States is breaking off of NATO. United States is deconstructing NATO. There's big changes happening in the United States. It's as if there was some type of geopolitical coup or some type of geopolitical revolution in the United States. But it's important that the Russian foreign minister says that this is very, very bad. If you look at Vucic, whenever he deals with Angela Merkel, whenever he deals with Brussels, he always has this sort of complacent, diminutive, subservient role that he plays. But everyone who knows him personally, and people that I've worked with know him very well, know that he's has always worked to actually control his temper. He's someone who can lose his shit pretty easily. And there's a funny story. One time he throws a laptop out of the window of the Radical Party headquarters down the street from here and flying into a rage. So the Vucic that you see who's with his hands like this and saying, oh yes, well, we are just very simple Serbian people, and this is because he knows that the imperial arrogance, whether it's Washington or Berlin, that they expect that from him. And that's how countries act. The truth is that Serbia did not win its last war, but it did not entirely lose it either, right? We have, right? I mean, did not entirely lose it, Serbia still exists. That's something. I mean, when you look at what's happening in other parts of the world when the U.S. attacks, they don't exist. So I would say that Serbia is not a failed state.
Absolutely not.
And when you look at what's happened in Montenegro, Serbia just won. Let's say Serbia won that election in Montenegro, actually. That just happened 2 weeks ago. So that's huge. So, now people are talking about Montenegro and Serbia rejoining.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And I know that the pro-Serbian party won the election in Montenegro.
Right.
And pro-Serbian here really equals pro-Serbian equals pro-Russian.
Pro-Russian. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right. That's
yeah.
right. And it
So
was,
yeah, I'm
yeah,
really glad about that. I'm really glad about the fact that the pro-Serbian slash pro-Russian party won the election because the former leader, or is he still a leader? I don't know. Milo Djukanovic was really a repulsive, repugnant person. He was a
yeah,
bad guy. He was an a-hole. Should I call
yeah,
him
yeah,
like
yeah.
that? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Djukanovic he tried to win this election. He tried to use COVID provisions to suppress voting. They were busing people in from other countries to come vote illegally. I mean, this is how they won the referendum. 12, 13 years ago, was they had fake voters on the rolls, and people also their votes were changed, and other people didn't really know what they were voting for. But yeah, Djukanovic is on his way out now as a result of this election. That's very good. So you have to look at people are looking at the trajectory of Serbia, right?
yeah.
Like it is blossoming. Okay. The problem is in the patriotic scene is that they're like doom patriots. These people need some fucking success coaching because how you frame things and how you understand the world actually predicts the things that are going to happen to you, and how you see the lens that you see through things. It's like you can end up with a totally demented worldview. So I mean, you can really deconstruct this agreement. I mean, I think that Serbia wins with this agreement, and it's so important that patriots keep criticizing it as a loss because that's the strategy. I hope people can, you have very intelligent listeners, and that's why you have like a niche audience. So they're
Yeah.
going to understand the fine points here. What I'm sort of trying to telegraph here, it's actually you have commitment to build a rail system and parallel road system, highway from Niš to Pristina. So Niš is like the biggest city in southern Serbia, where there's a Russian military base. Now, historically, the military problem of Yugoslavia and Serbia with Kosovo and Montenegro was the lack of a road or direct line to transport people, supplies. You have supply line security, and obviously movement, the rapid deployment. So now for example, if China makes so again, Serbia has 8 million people and Kosovo has like several 100,000 people. So if China has, and we can say Taiwan is like Kosovo.
Yeah.
Okay. So if China makes a free trade agreement with Taiwan, who wins? It's not Taiwan. If China builds a super highway or a super rail with Taiwan, does that mean that Taiwan is now prepared to fucking invade China? No, that's not how it works with, whatever, 10 million versus 1.4 billion. It's not how that's not how it works. So it's like this agreement allows for Serbians to repopulate Kosovo. That's what mini Schengen means.
So I would like to ask you also not to divert from the Balkan question. I've never asked you about them actually, but I would like to ask you about Albanians because don't get me wrong, I know the times, I don't remember actually, but I know the times when Albania under the communist leader Enver Hoxha was one of the, under Stalin times of course, was one of the closest allies of the Soviet Union in the Balkans because of the the Stalin-Tito split and the Soviet Yugoslav split. Albania became kind of the main ally of the Soviet Union in the Balkans, but later, after Stalin's death, and then Hoxha split with the Soviet Union as well. But
Right. Like he split with Khrushchev and went with Mao.
yeah.
He
And
went
then
with the Chinese.
Then Mao died, Hoxha even split with the Chinese. So
Right.
basically Albania became isolated. So is it
Yeah, he opposed
possible?
the Gang of Four.
Yeah. Is it possible for Russia and Albania to improve our relations? Because I know people who traveled to Russian people who traveled to Albania as tourists, and while it's not the same as Turkey, it's not the same service, not the same hotels. many of them actually quite liked it. So what about Russia and I know Albania is a part of NATO, and there are strong pro-US sentiment there, but Albania is also important player on regional player in the Balkans. I mean, so what's your take on that?
I think really the secret Albanian story is the Italy Albania connection, and there's a long-standing indigenous Albanians of Italy. There's a really deep esoteric history between Italy and Albania, and ethnic groups of Italy that are Albanian that predate, Romanization of the entire Italian peninsula. It's very interesting. The Calabrian mafia in Italy is very much integrated into the Albanian mafia is the Italian mafia in the Adriatic. So it's people don't really follow this story very well, but it's whatever. Russian relations with Albania will always triangulate with Italy. So that's the key. So the status of Russian-Albanian relations is always going to be a subset, not of Russian-Serbian relations, but of Russian-Italian relations. So Italian and Albanian economic relations and its historic ties are very, very deep, in fact. And Albanians are divided. They have like two distinct languages. They don't understand each other. And
if I'm not mistaken, Gag and Tosk Albanians.
That's correct. That's right. And they have three religions, so they're divided that way. They're Catholic, Orthodox, and Muslim. So, but it's like the United States. When a Russian meets Americans, he might meet someone from New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, and you will notice their Americanness. But within America, they notice, oh, he's a Texan, he's a New Yorker. But outsiders are like, oh, you're American. So the Balkans is like the United States. And then when you're in there, people notice the differences. But on the outside looking in, Albanians are similar to Serbs in many ways. They would consider that an insult. Both would consider it an insult to say. But really, from the outside looking in, they're more alike than different. And Albanians and Serbs are more similar to each other than English people and Serbs, right? Or Albanians and English people. But it's really the politics and geopolitics really inflamed by a lot of internecine and interethnic narrative, how you interpret medieval history and how you interpret ancient antiquity, and who are the Illyrians and who was here first, and where the Albanians were there before the Greeks, and it just gets really, really deep and crazy in the sense of it doesn't create a path forward. Right? You can do a lot of good stuff with giving people a sense of identity, but when that identity is set on a collision course with everyone else's identity, then you're going to have a fucked up situation.
Yeah.
So, Albania is in a crisis because they're in the EU. And Albania is in a crisis because they're in NATO, but they're just a target zone. They're like Poland, they're like impact zone, and they're best to get out of NATO, if you ask me. Albanians are leaving Albania faster than Serbs are leaving Serbia. And this is because Albanians can get into the EU a lot more easily. By the way, Kosovo Albanians are also leaving Kosovo. So back to this agreement, this agreement that was signed allows Serbs to return to Kosovo. And it also creates an investment fund to build new housing projects, and a new consortium can be developed for apartment buildings where tens of thousands of new Serbs can repopulate Kosovo. And Yuri, that's something I want to say. In Serbia, of course we hear that, Kosovo is Serbia, but how many Serbs are going to put their money where their mouth is and then, move to Kosovo? Because if you look at the ethnic composition of Kosovo, there's a strong argument that Kosovo should be a type of Albanian state based upon the demographics, and even though people can make a history argument, and it's a good argument, and it's largely a correct argument about how Kosovo was depopulated of Serbs over the course of the last 150 years even. So There's been several attempts to repopulate, but it hasn't taken hold. So, if Serbs are willing to move to Kosovo, then you will have a new situation. This agreement doesn't recognize Kosovo as a state, and it eliminates the taxes, the tariffs that used to exist on Serbian goods going into Kosovo. So you have to think economically. So if you think they're going to build a rail line, which is military and trade, they're going to build a highway, they've eliminated these tariffs for Serbian goods into Kosovo. Yeah, it's bilateral in the sense that eliminate that tariff on Kosovo goods into Serbia, right? But that PDV tax of Albanian goods goes to the Serbian state. So that kind of functions like a back end for that missing revenue that never existed, that Serbia never collected from Pristina when Kosovo was still, when Kosovo still recognized that they were part of Serbia. So it's, there's a lot of back ends, and the devil is always in the details.
The details,
so I think, in the details is where you really see how it's spelled out. And you have to expect Vucic to play this role as subservient. That's the role that's expected. And it's supposed to be one that outrages nationalists and patriots. They want like a leader to be like Serbia and come in and be like, fuck you, Merkel, and I'm with Putin, and this and the fuck the United States. But that's but that's not reality. That's like not even in movies. Like if you watch that as a movie, you would be like, okay, that's cool, but that's not like a credible script, right? So I mean, Serbia's goal is to regain territory and economics that it lost from war without going to war. You see, well, that's really the thing that we're seeing. So
yeah, absolutely. So I made a video about a Serbian tank, the Serbian upgrade M84 tank, and in some characteristics, it is even superior to the latest Russian T-72B3 upgrade. So I think that's good, because Serbia must stay strong, like the meme, Serbia is strong. It must stay strong because even as an ally of Russia, let's just consider, in case of a hypothetical NATO invasion, Serbia must hold out at least a couple of weeks before the Russian forces can come to their aid.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of your viewers are in the United States, and they may not appreciate the smallness of the geography. So even though Russia is giant, it's giant eastward from Moscow, but Moscow is pretty close to the rest of Europe. And we saw with the war in Syria that it only takes like a few hours for Russians from the south, the southernmost front, from the south front of Russia. It only takes from the southern military district. It only takes like an hour or two to get to Syria. So it's very, very fast. And similar with Serbia, it's not that far away. Serbia's military is larger than it appears on paper. Serbia's job has been to hide their military, through creating parallel institutions, civil service. Serbia has been doing backdoor things to increase mandatory military service. They're not doing it blanket, but there's new jobs like in civil service and different government jobs that preferential hiring for military background. And in a real war situation, the size of your army is kind of important, but what's more important is how fast you can raise your second army. And so the number of people with training, the number of people who've gone through basic training, or the number of people who have served in the past conflicts. So guys who served in the conflicts in the 90s are my age now. So they are, and I'm not a young guy, but they're still healthy and they're fighting age guys. So, and they can handle it. This is really what people look at in military. It's not just the size of your army, but how fast you can raise an army as good as the army you just lost, because you lose armies in wars. And they have a lot more, Serbians have a lot more equipment than is registered. And they're constantly getting criticized by NATO. See, the thing is that the hurrah patriots are always looking at the the empty part of the glass. They don't look at the full part of the glass. And I'm not proposing any optimism. I'm proposing what's called realism. So NATO is constantly attacking Serbia for having too large of an army. Serbia does not agree to weapons reductions. It has the most tanks in the Balkans, and so forth. So what Serbia really needs to get their hands on is some, even like S-300s would be good. These can be upgraded, as you know, to be almost as good as S-400, but even S-250s can be upgraded to be like S-300s, or they call it also, there's like a VS-350, which is like an upgrade of S-300, right?
Oh, you mean the 350, the Vites
Yes.
350, yeah.
Yes.
That's a good system. It's better than the original S300, and it's like it's a heavy upgrade. It's almost as good as S400, but
Yeah, and the thing is that even American fifth generation is more like 4.5 generation, because the Americans dropped the ball with the corruption in the military industrial. It was all about the money.
yeah.
So I think that, but again, this is like cool to talk about the military stuff, but you always want to avoid military solutions. You should really look at the trade agreements. You should really look at the demographic changes. Look, let me say this again. Kosovo Albanians are fleeing Kosovo, and Albanians, they don't really like Kosovo Albanians. There's actually strong tensions. It's kind of like Montenegrins who don't like Serbs. There's they speak Serbian. They're called Serbian when they travel, but there's strong tensions between some Montenegrins, especially if they have a Croatian or Bosnian background. But even among Serbs, there was strong pressure under Đukanović to stop calling yourself Serbian of any kind. And in Albania, they don't love Kosovo Albanians. Oh, they love when they fight, and they love when they can recruit KLA. They love when they can attack Serbia, but they don't love Kosovo Albanians at all in Albania. They have big problems, different culture. They've been separated for generations. They have different pop stars. They eat different food. They have different slang. They support different football clubs. They're not really connected in the same way. So, I know that seems strange to some, but it's, it really creates the possibility for Serbs who put their money where their mouth is to start moving because this mini Schengen allows it. You see, another part of the agreement, because we're talking about the agreement, is that the Kosovo Pristina has to invest also in recovering missing bodies of Serbs from the conflict. There's actually a lot more that we don't have time to talk about. But I really think people should look at this but understand the big picture.
Yeah, so I think we've talked enough, and I think we need to wrap this up right now, because I think you don't have that much time.
Yeah, I have obligations here.
Yeah.
But I knew our time would be short. But thank you for having me on. You're gonna get some negative comments about this, and people are gonna challenge it. So what I want you to do, let's make a deal.
Yeah.
Collect those questions, and people think, oh, but Joaquin said this, but actually this. Collect those questions. And then we'll do a follow-up, and we'll answer those questions.
All right, absolutely. But if there's going to be comments insulting me or Joaquin's, fuck you this, fuck you that, delete them.
Yeah, I don't. Keep them up. It's on them. It ain't on me. It's no reflection on me. Believe me.
All right. So yeah, it was great to having you again. I hope we're going to meet more frequently, to do more videos like in the old times. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah. So for now, bye, my friend.
All right. I'll see you.
До свидания.